Okay, so our final example to go with our examples from last week in the shapes and text animator sort of qualities, we are going to do a trim path trick. All right. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how to create with only two keyframes a little creepy crawly worm that goes across the screen following a path of your choice. And we've come kind of close to doing some of this already when we did the paintbrush trick. It's going to feel a little close to that. But we're also going to introduce you to a new idea, and that is expressions. So we are opening the project we did last week, or we were working in last week, called Shapes. If you don't have access to the one from last week, create a new one. Maybe call it Shapes 2, because if you ever pull all these together, this will be a continuation of those concepts. All right. So to start off, once you are in your Shapes project, then let's do a new composition. Going to the top of the composition menu, and I'm going to call it Trim Path. I have a couple already, so I'm going to put a 3 at the end of this. We're still working in 1920 1080 and 2398 frame rate, and a black background works perfectly fine for me. So I'm going to hit OK. All right. So the first thing we need to do is we need to create a shape layer. All right. So we're going to go up to the layer menu. We're going to go to new, and we're going to do shape layer. And not much appears to happen. It makes a little shape layer for us, but nothing's really showing up yet. And that's okay, because we're going to make that happen now. So what we want to do next is we want to actually go get our little pen tool. So you can hit the letter G, or you can go to the top here to the pen tool. And I am going to draw. I'm going to shrink my screen a little because I want what I'm going to do to start outside the frame. So you've seen me do this several times. Go just a little margin around mine. Results may vary. Mine's 33% to do that. And I am going to create a line that basically swooshes in kind of like a curvy Z or a backwards S. It's going to come in from the left. It's going to curve around in here, and then it's going to go off this side of the screen. But I'm going to do it with points, right? So I'm going to click a point, go a little further in. If you click and hold for a second, it'll let you do a curvier line, right? That is not perfect by any means, but I want to make it a little bit elegant. And then off the page, the same, right? Now, if you don't like your lines, how they turned out, once you've drawn the whole line, you can actually get off of that pen tool by going back to the letter V for the arrow tool. You can sort of click on nothing, and then you can actually click back on these little points, and you can rebend things if you didn't like how they turned out. So like that one wasn't as elegant as I really wanted it to be. So maybe this swoops down and this swoops up a little bit. But the point is, make it nice and cool. Just want you to understand that if you didn't draw it perfectly, it's not that hard to go in and fix. But we want a little drama to it. That's kind of cool. All right. So the next thing we want to do, I have to double check my own work here, is we want to add under the contents, we want to add a trim path. So we're going to go to shape 1. So I'm opening, sorry, I was referencing my other project. So I'm uncollapsing under my shape layer, under contents, shape 1, path, and I am going to add trim paths to this. right? And I'm going to double check that I've done this correctly. Shape 1, trim path. Shape 1, path, trim path. Yep. Yay me. Okay. So if we take the start and end time that has now appeared under trim paths 1, and you move these, you will see the line track down from the beginning if you're dragging the start point, or from the end if you're dragging the end point. Now, the thing is, my line is super thin right now. So to get in and make that stroke bigger, I can go into the stroke section and I can go to the stroke width. It's set to 7, and I can bring it up and make it a little thicker so that I can see what it is. If I don't like the color, I have a color control right here. I can click on it and say, yeah, let's do red. That'll be kind of cool and neon-like. All right. So now if I go back to that trim paths thing again, I can basically go and trim the beginning and the end down to where this becomes a little bit of a segment. Okay, so by trimming back from the end and forward from the start, I can get a sense of what this looks like if those numbers have a proportionate difference. All right, so if I hit, I want to see if this works. Okay, we're just going to do it with our own math. All right, so what I'm already noticing is that I'm at about 20% and about 25%, and I kind of like how long this little segment is. So that's telling me there's a 5% difference between where the start of this is and the end of this is. So the end is a little ahead of the start point, right? So if I set my start point to 0 and I set my end point to 5, then everything is almost off the screen. I'm actually going to set it to 4 and see if that, yep, that got rid of it. All right, so maybe we do a 4 segment thing. All right, so I'm at the front of this animation, right? I'm at the front of my comp. I have now set start to 0 and end to 4. So it's only 4% ahead of where the start point is. And I'm going to set my first keyframe for both of these controls. And now I'm going to go 2 seconds in, and I'm going to do the same basic math, except the one at the end is going to hit 100%. And the start point is going to be 4% shy of 100%. So let's do 96. All right, so that should, when I set those, because I moved my playhead over this far, that should have set a new keyframe manually or automatically for us. So we now have 4 keyframes, one for start and one for end, but there's only 2 per track. So it's 4 total, but basically a start and an end point. And if you drag your playhead back, you will see that this distance, because it's consistent, a 4% difference between the start point and the end point, we get what appears to be a moving thing following the path that we drew. Pretty cool. Now, the only thing I don't like about it is it's got kind of a harsh end on it, right? It's literally just sort of cut off there. So I should be able to round that off by going to the line join and going to round. Didn't work. Okay, make a line. I'm sorry, lined cap, round. I went to the wrong one. So line cap, not line join. If you change it to round cap, you get a much more rounded, and I'm going to let this be a little bigger now, more rounded end to this. So this is pretty cool. So again, we set 2 keyframes. We drew the path we wanted it to follow, and now it will do that. And if I set it, I'm going to set my region. I'm going to set the letter N here so that it stops over here. and loops back, but it runs and flies off the screen. It's gone for a second and then it's looping back. Now, this can be used to underline things. This could be used to punctuate points. Okay. And yes, you should be able to, you could have this run in circles. Yes. If I click off of the mask, if I collapse all of this and click on nothing, then the line that it's following goes away. You can see it just animate on the screen. Right? So it doesn't have the fancy flames and all that stuff that we saw in the example last week, but my gosh, this was really quick. And once you know how to do it, it's like, oh, I can have something fly in or a couple of things fly off of an image, you know? So I was mentioning the idea of the guitar chord that I used and I had a little things, whirly things come off of them. It would be super easy to do that this way. Right? You just draw it right off the guitar and things go off. It's cool, right? All right, now the only thing about my original that you don't see happening in this example is when I was playing my original without looping my entire section, because it hasn't even hit its loop point, and yet it is looping. How did I do that? Well, the answer is expressions. Expression is a little bit of code that basically tells a certain sort of keyframeable control what to do. All right. I have a hand up. Yes, Ashley, ask away while I deconstruct how I do this.
My my mask line when I made it, uh, whenever the little line like range that we selected would go around a curve, it shows a like it connects the two and fills it in with blue. Do you know how to turn that off?
Um, I don't. It tried to complete the shape, you're saying. So anything, yeah. Did you actually connect the two, the ending point and the beginning point?
I did not.
Okay. I would maybe undo it until undo until you get back to where they're clearly not, you know, to where you have an ending point that doesn't touch. But I'm not sure how. I have seen that happen before, but I'm not sure what causes that. And so I don't know what to tell you what not to do. But I will tell you if you keep undoing, you'll eventually get back to where you have your pens, you know, your pen marks going on. All right. So, sorry, I can't be more specific about that, but that's what I have to do. I have to double back and undo. Yes, Hannah says she may know how to fix that. Let's go ahead and unmute her. Tell
Hi.
us, Hannah.
So at the top of the screen where you have next to where you choose your color, your spill and stroke, if you click on the fill, the word fill, you can select a transparent option. So the one with the line through it, and then press OK. So see the little red, those, yeah, that one, that's transparent. And that should fix the filling in option, the fill in thing.
Cool. That's a very good way to solve that. Thank you.
It's the same thing
Great.
in Photoshop too.
Ah, good to know. That's great. All right. Any other questions before we move on to being able to make this automatically loop on its own? Fantastic. Thank you again, everybody. That's great. We're all in this together, right? I'm sorry you have to sometimes come up with your own answers, but it's just the name of the game these days. All right, so you'll notice that I'm going back to my example that I did before the one I just did in front of you. So this one loops, and before it hits the end of my comp, it doubles back and loops again. Why? Because I've added this little command to loop out. Okay, that is an expression. That is a little piece of code that we're going to use. All right, so it's loop lowercase l loop capital O U T and then some brackets with nothing inside it. And that's being applied to the start and end so that they both basically replay themselves. So how did I add those? Well, if we go back to my example, I alt click on the stopwatch for the trim path start, it will now give me this new place that I can actually put some text in. Again, it's lowercase l, but capital O. So I'm going to type it L-O-O-P, capital O-U-T. You'll notice it already has some awareness of what commands it is capable of doing, and it's trying to help me as I type. So if I say, yep, that's it, brackets with nothing in it, that's what I was going for, I can click and it will go. Now, that is the start. If I do that, it's going to get jacked up, right? Because I'm only looping the start, and it takes a start position and an end position to make this animation work. So I have to go to the end as well. And again, I'm Alt clicking on the stopwatch, and it opens up the ability to put that in here. And I'm going to type the same thing again, loop. It's already kind of offering it to me. So I'm going to double click on that and say, yep, that's what I was going for. Now I can take my end of my comp and I can go much further down. And when you play it, it will keep looping upon the moment that it hits the end. So it's actually loop, 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 looping for me without me having to build a comp that loops. It's literally in the command to do that, right? Any questions on that before I stop? Now, one thing that's kind of interesting here, the controls turned red, which is kind of interesting. It's, I think, trying to call attention to you that if you haven't uncollapsed these, so if I collapse these back, you can't see the command over here anymore. So it's basically telling you, hey, you're running an expression on these controls because it is hard to know. You know, not every expression even needs keyframes. We have keyframes in ours, but you could have an expression assigned to one of these variables that's looping, and there wouldn't even be a keyframe assigned to it, which means that if I did the old trick of just clicking on a track and hitting the letter U, it might not even bring up. In this case, it did. It brought up the things, the keyframes that I have. But the point is, you don't have to keyframe to make one of these expression tricks work. So just opening, hey, show me anything I put keyframes on, is not always going to work. So they're trying to show you in red, hey, you've got sort of an auto program running here, which is sort of what expressions do. All right.